something to present analysis of what all kinds of Indian inscriptions are there, what all languages are there, how many years. We might touch upon many of those things, but it's not exactly the reason is not to provide a total statistical view. It's not even to provide a complete chronology of all inscriptions, or I'm not going to represent all dynasties or all regions of India equally, because I come from Karnataka, and there will be probably more inscriptions from Karnataka, but I'm probably touching upon many other inscriptions that are interesting for various reasons, and you'll see what those interesting aspects are. And I'm not going to cover well-known and very famous inscriptions only, or for example, everybody knows about, we have studied about Ashoka's inscriptions and all those type of things which are part of our history curriculum. So I'm probably not touching much of those things. But the idea of this whole thing is to get you interested to explore on your own about inscriptions from any time period, any region, any language that you may find yourself close to for whatever reason, and understand the common cultural thread that goes through these inscriptions, the whole of India. So that is the total outcome that I would say I want to the experience that I want you to have. And at the end, if there is time, we can also discuss. I know that there are many of you who are deeply interested in this and know a lot of things about inscriptions. So I know we can have some kind of discussion as well towards the end, once and whatever I have thought for today is done. Does that sound good?
Yep.
Okay.
Yes, thanks.
Thank you. Thanks for the confirmation. So why do we study inscriptions? I mean, we have all looked at inscriptions at some way or the other. We have read about inscriptions in your textbooks, or if you have gone to a temple, very likely all of you have some kind of inscription anywhere in those temples. You may have tried to read some of them. You may have wondered, what the people who have written those, or sometimes we cannot read that, and we try to decipher what could it be there. Some of them are written so nicely, the very wonderful calligraphy. And you also have heard about hero stones and the sati stones that are there in lots of villages all around India. So mainly, okay, the point of studying inscriptions is to know the history of where you are, where you come from, and also to see how you relate to other regions and other countries, all along in the cultural history of the country. And also you can understand the growth of languages, literature in India. I know India is probably one of the richest in terms of the number of languages it has, or the and still being spoken and still being written in, compared to many of the other parts of the world. So and we know that languages are not static, so they do languages are they grow as time goes, right? They grow and they change, and they give rise to other languages. So we can understand this part. We can learn lots of lessons from history, right? We know that everything wasn't right in the past. Everything is not right even today. So, but not everything is wrong today, nor was everything wrong earlier. So there are things that we can learn from the past to avoid some of the mistakes that were done before, or to correct ourselves where we are going wrong right now, things like that. So totally, inscriptions are a very important key to learn about our past. Okay, so inscriptions are a very major source for learning about past, as I said. And the thing is that the variety of subjects that you can see from these inscriptions is enormous. So you will learn about the governance and taxation of those times, the different social practices, what types of philanthropy or public works were being undertaken by the kings and the officers and the governments of those times. You can also learn about food and culinary traditions, science and mathematics, arts and literature, music, dance, education, languages and scripts evolution. It may be surprising for many, but India has so many different languages, but most of the languages, the way they are written now with multiple scripts, they have almost all come from a single source, what is now called Brahmi. It was probably, and we don't know what it was called back then, but what we call as Ashokan Brahmi, the script where Ashoka's edicts are there. So that's been called Brahmi recently, and that has given rise to almost all the scripts that are used in India today, and not only in India but also many in China and Thailand, Cambodia, Burma, and Sri Lanka. So hundreds of scripts have come from a single source. That way, that's probably one of the biggest influences that India has had on this part of the world. We can also learn about military expansions, expeditions, and things like that, and how the society worked in the past. So this is what we can get by a study of the inscriptions. And how long have inscriptions being studied? I think the modern studies, we can say about 200 years. We have had this tradition of writing inscriptions for very, very long. So I guess, right? In temples, some places you find inscriptions written over hundreds of years in the same place. So I'm pretty sure the people over there knew what was written there in the previous inscriptions, and there were pandits who sort of tracked what was there. If you know, some places in India have literally hundreds of inscriptions. For example, in Karnataka, you can name Shravanabelagola, which has inscriptions all the way from probably 3rd century to 18th century. And I think it's the highest number of inscriptions in Karnataka. And also there is Hampe, which has a number of inscriptions. And of course, you will have Kanchipuram and in Tamil Nadu, and what's the Srirangam. These are places where you will find literally hundreds of inscriptions. And if you go to central India, Vidisha and Sanchi, these are places where you have hundreds of inscriptions in a small area. So also in Bodh Gaya. So you will see literally, if you go to one temple, you will see multiple languages, multiple scripts, the development of the particular language in the literary traditions of a given language in the same campus. So it's really amazing what you can see. Now the good thing is, thanks to the internet, a lot of the work that was done in the last say 200 years, in books like Epigraphia India, Epigraphia Karnataka, various inscriptions, they're all available on the internet for the common man. We learn very little at the school level, and obviously it's there is a reason for it, and there's people, you can only cover certain things within the given amount of time, and that's fine. But the thing is, there are new finds happening all the time, and they don't get into your textbooks soon enough. Sometimes they don't even get into the textbooks after decades. Sometimes they never get into the textbooks, unfortunately. So even now there are inscriptions that are being discovered. They are being read. They are sort of rewriting history. So there is a need to update ourselves on what we know about the past. So therefore, you may have heard this, seen this in the media or in social media, or you may have actually personally seen that what you know from your own experience is not what is there in the textbooks. So this is very strange, but it happens. So therefore, I think it's a really good. There's a good reason we should keep a tab on what's happening and study these things for our own interest. I'm just showing why and how the inscriptions are being found now. For example, these are some 4 very interesting inscriptions found in 2020. There was an inscription of Chalukya Jaisimha in Nashik. This is what is called a copper plate inscription. So when we say inscription, it could be written in multiple different types of material. We know that there is perishable material and there is something that can stand the test of time. And I think when initially there were inscriptions that were written over material that perished, and then they figured out to stand the test of time, they had to put it in a material that can be preserved, like for example copper, and these are called copper plate inscriptions. And then also we say that something written in stone is never going to get erased. So most of the inscriptions are that you may have seen are the stone inscriptions in various places. Generally the copper plates are given for grants whenever somebody made a donation of a village to a specific temple or some lands. Those are the types of things, the transfer of property, etc. They're all mostly in the copper plate inscriptions, and they come with a seal, generally of the particular king or the dynasty that will have their emblem. So that by that way, that you can actually tell what time it is from, what king it is from, or what part of the country it is from, all those things. There's here a Tulu inscription that was found in last year from 13th century. Till very lately, people were thinking Tulu did not have a script. At least last couple of centuries, most of the people, Tulu's people, would even write Tulu in Kannada script. But there was a Tulu script which is it's also called Tigilari. It's very close to Malayalam script, or they both branch from the same thing, same source, we can say. So we see an inscription in Tulu language in Tulu script from 13th century. So there is that long history for that script, but it was totally left out. So there is this one is a temple from Vajravada in Maharashtra, where there is a Kannada inscription that was found very recently. So this tells the temple was renovated in 1371, and it doesn't tell when the temple was built. So basically, it gives you some additional information about what is happening in a certain area. This one is from 2021. Just a few days ago or a couple of months ago, this is an inscription near Tumkur. They found that this was not read. When we say an inscription was found, many times it's always there in plain sight, but it's not been read and documented. So this one was in particular temple called in some near a temple, and it was not documented in any of the epigraphia volumes from Karnataka. So this one, until now, we didn't know the exact date of Krishnadevaraya's death, but this one actually tells the date he passed away. It was a Kartika Purnima day, and there was an eclipse on that particular day. So we know now that that was 1529 October 17. So this really helped us to chart down the unknown, connect the dots, so to say. There is another few finds from the last few years. One of them is a Sanskrita inscription from near Guntur, around in the 2nd century, early 3rd century. So this is now considered the oldest Sanskrita inscription in South India. So we know that, as a lot of people, there are maybe conflicts on that, but I believe that there are two different main language families, and at some point of time, Sanskrita expanded its range towards South India, and then we started getting inscriptions, and vocabulary started coming in from Sanskrita into South Indian languages. So this probably tells, okay, now if there is an inscription, that means there are people who might be able to read it. So that means there are people who know that language. So that's what you can infer. And there is another inscription from Hampi. We all know that Hampi was became as the famous as the capital of Vijayanagara, the Karnataka Samrajya, in the 14th century, right? And we know just before that, a century or two at the most, the Virupaksha temple was there, and Kannada poets like Harihara Raghavanka lived there. But the excavations have shown there were inscriptions starting from the 1st century. So normally, anybody will not go and build a capital where there was no previous history or previous known history. No, it's not like totally going into a vacant land and building a new capital. That's not how it is. So generally, they are built at a place where it's already a trading center. It's well connected and all that, right? So that's how things happen. So the Hampi, to become a capital in the 14th century, it already had a 15 centuries of life, so to say. For that matter, that Bengaluru, we say that Bengaluru was built by Kempegowda, or the modern city of Bengaluru was sort of built by the fort was built by Kempegowda in 1537. But we have inscriptional evidence showing that the name Bengaluru in an inscription from 890. So it's about 600 years before Kempegowda, a town called Bengaluru did exist. And that doesn't tell that the area wasn't populated, or the villages weren't around even before that. So Bengaluru has a history of more than 1300 years at least. Similarly, in Halebeedu, right? Halebeedu, also called Dwarasamudra, because of the big lake at the entrance of the town. But that lake, or the Dwarasamudra, is named after a king from Rashtrakutas 500 years before Hoysalas. His name was Dora. So that place was actually Dorasamudra. So that's how, after 5 centuries, it became a capital, or 4 centuries probably, became capital of Hoysalas. But before that, it probably was an important, important place for the previous kingdoms as well. So this is why this is so fascinating for us to look through what is happening in this arena. Is the pace that I'm going okay? Is it any feedback?
Okay,
thank you. Okay, so the way I have arranged is there is no specific flow that I'm following. I thought a few of the interesting areas, and it's generally things that I am interested in, and which I think will be interesting to a lot of people. So that is how I do. It's not the only way to categorize these. There can be several ways, different ways of categorizing this, but I have just made it into some 4 or 5 different segments where we can see what we learn from inscriptions. So first, going to languages and scripts. Okay, so when did writing start in India? It is we think that during Indus Saraswati civilization, we see lots of these what you call seals, and there are short inscriptions over there. But until now, we have not really deciphered what language it is, whether it represents a language. There's a lot of controversy on what those short seals tell from IVC, Indus Valley Civilization, or Sindhu Saraswati Civilization. But some people say it's just like indicating a trader's, what you call trader's mark or something like that. It's like a trademark, and it is not a real language, so we don't know. We know that writing started. Well, writing was there in places like Egypt and Mesopotamia. It is said that the script writing came from the West Asia to India. It's possible. Given that the very ancient literature from India was never written, so Vedas were not written. They were always called Smriti, so that they are kept in memory, right? So it's possible that they were not written because they did not have a system of writing. That's one possibility. And then the other thing is the material was scarce. Even after when they started writing, maybe the writing materials might have been very scarce and hard to preserve. Of the practical difficulties could have been there. So we can't exactly tell when it started, but I think by the time of Pani, who we can say is definitely 500 BCE or earlier. It could be anywhere between 800 to 500 BCE. Probably towards somewhere between 600 to 500 BCE is Panini's time. He does mention about lipi and writing. So therefore, but he also does a lot of phonetics and speech, right? It's not the whole text is not. It's about grammar, how you speak, not about how you write. But there are references to writing. So therefore, writing must have been known to India at the time of Panini. That is for sure. And coming a little later. In Arthashastra, which we traditionally attach to Chanakya or Kautilya, who was contemporary of Chandragupta Maurya, there are definitely indications of writing in Arthashastra. Now there are some people who say that Arthashastra was not written by Chanakya; it was a work of 2nd century CE. I mean, 300 or 400 years later, it was from the time of Guptas, not from Mauryas and so on. But I think they don't really hold a lot of water, those arguments, because some of the arguments that are being tried to put forth are quite notable. So Arthashastra definitely mentions writing. It also talks about what are the qualities that should be there in a scribe. Arthashastra also tells that records, that a king has to keep records for about 100 years. The budget and the annual budget of his kingdom, where money goes, where it comes, and so on. So it's really amazing that these types of things were done at the time. So what was used for writing? As I said, I think they started writing in perishable material, where like the Bhurjapatra, Talapatra, so which has to be copied and recopied and so on. And therefore, for writing that has to stand for longer time, they started using metal as well as stone. Okay. So I was talking about records. So how do we know these records were kept? I said Arthashastra recommends keeping records for 100 years. Yuan Chang, in his book, he talks about he saw political records being maintained yearly when he visited in India in the middle of 7th century. So he came to India sometime around 620 or 630, when Harsha was ruling in the north and Chalukya Pulakeshin was in the south, and he went all around India. So some of these things we get from records from other visitors to India. So I'm just giving some important inscriptions. It's not that I'm mentioning a whole lot, but just talk about a few. So the earliest inscriptions that we have right now are all leaving the some of the pottery type of inscriptions that are found in Tamil Nadu, which are dated even before Ashoka's time. They're all small pieces. So therefore, I think the earliest ones that have been dated are from Ashoka. So Ashoka's inscriptions are all in spread all the way from Afghanistan on one side to I think Bengal on the east to Karnataka. So it spreads such a vast area, and he used the language Prakrita. So the Prakrita, when I say Prakrita is, you can consider it as a dialect of Sanskrit. So the initial inscriptions that we see, they're all in Prakrita. Even in south, that Shatavahanas who followed Mauryas, their inscriptions are in Prakrita. Later on, the Prakrita itself became multiple dialects. It's very natural that when a language is spoken in a very wide area, there are different flavors of language. Even in a state like Karnataka, you have different types of dialects. Forget about the whole Karnataka, Kannada, but a language called Havyaka Kannada. It's a subset of Kannada that itself has 6 or 7 different dialects. Konkani, which is spoken across the coast, that also has many dialects. So naturally, Sanskrita, which was known over a much wider area, it's very, very likely that it has a huge number of dialects, and that later on formed into various languages in North India. As I said, there are Tamil inscriptions which are dated comparable to Ashoka's time. They're all called Tamil Brahmi because it's the same as Ashokan Brahmi. They modified some of the characters to represent sounds that are not there in Prakrita and therefore in the original Brahmi script. This is how all the scripts got developed. So the same Brahmi script in Karnataka, it became the Kadamba script later on, what we call the Kadamba script. And then it became the Chalukya script. So they're all called now, we call them the early Kannada. You can call them the Chalukya script or the Kadamba script, or you can also call it as the early Kannada script, right? And then from that, the Chalukya script became what is more recognizable as the Hoysala script, and which is very close to what our current day Kannada script. So in the last 1,000 years, probably it's not much of a change, but in the 1,000 years before that, the script went changed much more rapidly. So similarly, that you have the first inscription in Kannada found so far is this called the Simha Katanjana inscription. It's a very short inscription. It's from around the 350 CE time frame. So this is the first Kannada long inscription, so to say, from Halmidi until probably about 10 years when this was formed, 10 or 15 years. This Halmidi was considered the earliest inscription in Kannada. And this one, it's a very interesting inscription from Junagadh. Junagadh in Gujarat. It has an inscription by Ashoka. On the same rock, there is an inscription by a king called Rudradaman, who came about probably 300 years after Ashoka. So Ashoka's inscription is in the Prakrit, and Rudradaman's inscription is in Sanskrit. So this is, I think, the first long inscription in Sanskrit. So I mean, real. And here, the last one is an inscription from Ayodhya. This is considered as one of the early inscriptions in Sanskrit. It's about 1st century BC. So this is like has just 2 or 3 lines. What they also found that the pieces of this inscription were located at different places. What has happened is, there's a longer inscription, the stone is broken and the stone was used somewhere else. So similarly, there is a inscription called Hatibada Gosundi inscription in Rajasthan, where the part of the same inscription was found at 3 different places, separated by 15-20 kilometers. So it was somewhere in one building, and then it got broken for whatever reason, and then the same material was used as bricks or pillars for somewhere else. So this has happened. So therefore we don't know, if when we say an inscription was there from 150 CE or whatever, if we don't know if there was anything earlier to that, until you find, we can just say that, okay, this is the earliest Kannada inscription, but we don't know if we might find something later on. So going to the tradition, it's very interesting to see the spread of languages, where you will see and what types of material content the inscriptions tell you. I'm just taking these things from various sources. Some of them are very well known. Some of them also tell about how literature grew. This one is a Chalukya inscription from Badami called Kappe Arabhatta inscription. This has what we call Tripadi, which is still a popular form of folk poetry. So we know that this type of folk poetry existed. This is from, let's say, 600 CE, or maybe 50 years before or later. So 1400 years ago, this type of poetry existed, and it still is going strong. And similarly, this inscription is in Kanchipuram, and it is by a Chalukya king. What happened is, when Chalukya, the Pallavas came and defeated Chalukyas of Badami, and they put an inscription in Badami saying that, okay, they conquered it, and etc. And they actually had it under their sway for about 12 years. And then after some time, the Chalukyas outgrew Pallavas, and then they went and defeated the Pallavas and put an inscription in the Rajasimha temple. And I think this is a Kannada inscription in Kanchipuram. They, as they say, the biggest form of flattery is actually imitated. So they were very impressed by the architecture of the Rajasimha temple. So the King Vikramaditya, what he did was he built a temple in Pattadakal in the very exact same format, in the same plan, almost like a replica. So it's probably, he might have got sculptors from Kanchipuram and got it built here. And later on, most of you know, I am very sure that know about the Ellora's Kailasa temple, right? Which is built from top to bottom, from a single hillock, right? It's not a built temple, but it's built off a hill, carved out of a hill. So that the Kailasa temple is modeled after the Pattadakal temple. So you see that the same art traveled from the Kanchipuram to Badami to Elur or Ellora. So that sort of shows the cultural oneness that went through this different kingdoms. Yeah, sure, they did fight, they waged wars and all that, but I think they still had the common continuity of cultural thread going between them. So the right side inscription is a very famous inscription. I think this is currently in the Bangalore Museum. This is the Atkor inscription, which is a memorial stone for a dog. Usually, you find memorial stones in lots of villages you might have seen. They have, I don't have a picture of any memorial stone. They are called Veeragallu in Kannada, Veeragallu. And mostly you find highest number of Veeragallu, I think, are in Karnataka. There are some in Tamil Nadu as well, some in probably Andhra. some in Maharashtra. I don't think it was a very popular type of inscriptions in the north. So typically, Veeragalu is to commemorate a person's for extraordinary valor, of protecting a kingdom, protecting a village, sometimes, many times, protecting the cows and their other property, their women. So somebody who dies in such a war or such a fight, they are given a commemorative stone called Veeragalu. They're generally, three layer. Sometimes they have like 5 layers also. Generally, the first one shows where he's waging war, and second one he will show he's he dying there, and the third one, the top one, will generally show where he has gone to Swarga. So depending on what faith he follows, either he's shown in the presence of a Shivalinga, or sometimes in presence of a Jaina, like Parshvanatha or somebody, or Vishnu. So depending on what faith he was from. So and very elaborate Veeragalas have like 5 or 7 stories, not stories in the sense, slabs, you can say, in them. And here, this Veeragalu is for a dog. The name of the dog is Kali. It's very unusual, so I wanted to point that out. So, sorry, where did I go? Yeah, so then there is another inscription in Aihole, which is interesting for a couple of things. This is the actual picture, and this is this is somewhere you can read. If you know the Chalukya script from 6th century, you can try to read this. This is interesting because I wanted to put it here, because this is the first inscriptional reference where you find reference to Kalidasa, the poet, the first reference to Kali Yuga and the Mahabharata. So this is in Sanskrita language, and it's written in the Chalukya Kannada script. So in here he says, Saha Vijayetu Ravikirti Kalidasa Bharavikirti. So the Ravikirti is the writer of the inscription, and he says he's as great as a poet as Kalidasa and Bharat. And normally all inscriptions will tell the Shaka era, in specific Shaka era. Somewhat older inscriptions like like the Kushanas and Guptas, they are mostly telling about in the 13th year of this king. So they're not absolute. They are just relating to that particular king, which is hard to, which makes the chronology a bit harder. But later on, they generally refer to a Shalivahana Shaka, mostly in the south, and and sometimes in the north, I think they also refer to Vikrama Shaka and so on. So that's a slightly better reference. In this one, because it shows, it tells about the Kali Yuga era and the Shalivahana Shaka era, and they have come to some conclusion that the Shaka era started in 78 BCE. 78 CE, and Kali Yuga started in 3102 BCE. So that's how they have. This is one of the fulcrum setting inscriptions. And there are some people saying that was wrongly dated, but I think we'll go with the popular or narrative, and we'll keep that as this inscription was written in 636 CE. It also tells you how the languages grow and spread. Usually they indicate a local language or a language of administration. So you see, when you see a huge number of Kannada inscriptions in Maharashtra now, you can probably think that probably it was a more bilingual region, and then many of the Kannada people moved away from there, and so therefore leaving out the area to what is now Marathi, right? So probably during the times of Yadavas and earlier than the Shatavahanas, we probably can think it was more of a Prakrita and Kannada mixed people there. And later on, the kings being from primarily Kannada speaking kings, they put lots of Kannada inscriptions. So number one, because they were being understood by the people, and also because they were kings. So both aspects are there. And then you will find, for example, you will find a lot of Tamil inscriptions in South Karnataka, particularly in places that are associated with Ramanujacharya, like Thandanur and Melkota. You have a lot of Tamil inscriptions, and in places like Tirupati, which is probably the highest number of Tamil inscriptions over there, in addition to Kannada and Telugu inscriptions. In a place like Bengaluru, you have lots of Bengaluru sits at a place of a junction of 3 languages. So you have probably most inscriptions in Kannada, but there is a very sizable amount of inscriptions in Telugu and Tamil as well. And this inscription is I mean, we can't read anything over here. Here is this is the 790 inscription from Begur temple, where the name Bengaluru is mentioned for the first time. So this is what tells us that the city or the town existed at that point of time. And this is an inscription from Thandanur in Mandya district in Tamil. So this is where Ramanujacharya spent about, I think, last 15-20 years of his life in Thandanur. Sometimes an inscription is placed at a place where that language might have never been spoken, but it's still there. This is a very small Kannada inscription. It just says Matadashri Channaveeranavaru. And guess where it is? This is in Nepal. The reason is actually one of the, during Chalukya times, one of the commanders, Nanideva, he went north, he established a kingdom there. Although they stayed there for hundreds of years, they still carried that they are from Karnataka, and they had some touch. So you find a small inscription in this place is called Bhaktapur in Nepal. So apart from that, the northernmost Kannada inscription is in Madhya Pradesh, in a place called Jura. So I don't know where the northernmost Tamil inscription is, or where the southernmost Sanskrita inscription is. Probably easy. Probably it's there all around India. Okay. So with that, we can go to what I call concept of India. Sometimes you might hear that, many times you see in saying in media that there was no concept of India. There was no concept of a single country. It was all considered only the British made India. Or you might say, you may have also heard, Aurangzeb was the first king after Ashoka to have controlled India as a single territory. But I think India is not a political, India as a political country may be new, but India as a cultural one country has been for a very, very, very long time, as far as the history goes, I think. You see lots of examples of people from one region building temples, building chaityas, and lots of things, such things across the country. We say that there were 56 countries, right? Chapanaivatar Desharu. But here is an inscription from Karle. This Karle is near Pune. It's a famous chaitya there. And here it says, Vaijayanti to Sethina Bhutapalena Selagara Parinetapitam Jambu Dvipamahi. Natam or Kritam, I don't know. So it is telling a merchant from Vaijayanti. Vaijayanti is Banavasi in Karnataka. So it was a trading center it's been a trading center for 2000 years. So he says, this inscription says, a Shreshti, a merchant from Vaijayanti named Bhutapala, he made this Shaila Graha, this house made of stone for, this is like a chaitya, for Buddha. This rock mansion, the most excellent one in Jambudvipa, has been completed by the Sethi Bhutapala from Vaijayanti. So when you see the sponsors from across the country, this is not just one instance, it has been very common. So and the mentions like Jambudvipa and Bharatavarsha, it's very ridiculous for some people to claim there was no India. The idea of India was a British one, and it's really funny, so to say. You also see common cultural elements across the country. For example, this is an inscription from Chalukya Pulikeshi in Badami, which tells, okay, he did performed a Ashwamedha Yaga. And this is an Ayodhya inscription from a Shunga king called Dhana. And this is considered as I said, one of the earliest Sanskrit inscriptions. This also tells about the king doing a Ashwamedha Yaga. So it is, it's basically this common traditions that went across the countries. Similarly, here is an inscription from Chalukyas, which talks about Bharatavarsha. So he's talking about a specific area in Karnataka. And then it talks about, Satyashraya is a Chalukya prince, and he talks about Bharatavarsha. So which tells the mentions like Bharatavarsha, Jambudvipa, etc. They tell it's although it was probably not controlled by a single king, it was a culturally a unit from long time. And even when it was when you call that, when people say that Guptas or whichever king for that matter, they defeated all the others and established their rule. So most of the time what would happen is whoever was defeated will still get to keep their kingdom. They will still do the administration. They will probably pay a yearly kappa to whoever defeats them. So that is how it would happen. So that is how you see that we know that the Chalukyas overthrew Rashtrakutas overthrew Chalukyas, and after a couple of hundred years Chalukyas came back. So that is because the Chalukyas were still there. They were still acting as governors and smaller rulers under Rashtrakutas, and then they overthrew the Chalukyas again to come back as the second Chalukya clan. So similarly here, some inscriptions from Beluru which talk about I put this how this cross-country sponsorship of projects was pretty common. This is from somewhere in 1300s. A merchant from Kashmir, he adorned the Keshava temple with a golden kalasa. So it was and it's, you can see that the previous one in Karla was at 50 CE, and this is about 1200 years later. So that common thread of having traders going across the country, doing projects like this. They were doing what is considered as dharmic karya, right? Righteous things. It was there. It's been there for a very long time. Here is, I think this is nothing much. Here is an inscription from Mahakuta. Mahakuta is near Badami. Now it is in the Vijayapura Museum. This is a Sanskrit inscription in Kannada. I put that for a reason. Many times on social media, you see people talking like, okay, going to Kashi is not a thing for South Indians, and Ganga is nothing for Tamil people, and all these kinds of what I say nonsense, because the history doesn't tell that is true. Because lots of inscriptions talk about the sacredness of Ganga as for all Indians. So we know we have our own rivers. That's true. But the thing is, Ganga is considered sacred by everyone. So here on this inscription, he talks about he wanted to build this victory tower on the bank of Bhagirathi, but then he has some reason because his mother, actually not the stepmother, his stepmother has done a good thing of building a temple. Then he says, I'm going to build this victory tower right here at Mahakuta instead of erecting this victory tower next to Bhagirathi. So it just tells that some of these beliefs of this this Kashi Yatre maybe or Ganga Snana, these things have been part of our lives for very, very long time. Okay, coming to trade. So we just saw that the mention of a trader from Vaijayanti building a Chaitya in Karle. And here is something from Naneghat. Just a question, does anyone know what this is?
Is that a stupa?
Good guess. It is not.
Toll booth. It's a toll booth.
Yes, exactly. It is a toll booth. It's a toll booth. So we think that it is things like toll booth and highway. They are all modern inventions. You may have heard that Sher Shah Suri in your textbook. I'm sure you read. Sher Shah Suri built a highway, Grand Trunk Road, from going from Patliputra to Peshawar, or what is it called, Purushapura, right? Peshawar and all that. But is that true? It's unfortunately, whatever we see in textbooks is not always true. This is a toll booth, yes, and Nane is Nanya, or the coin. So this actually is on the Sahyadris, where you get down to the coastal region, going from Paitan. Paitan was the earlier was the capital of the Shatavahanas, and Paitan was the end of what was called as Dakshinapatha. So there were two main highways in ancient India. Trade was very, very well established. So the one called Uttarapatha went all in North India, going from Tamralipti in West Bengal, or maybe in Bangladesh now. I don't know exactly where Tamralipti is. From there to through the Gangetic Plain to Purushapura and Takshashila, right? So that was called the northern part, on the Uttarapatha. And then the Dakshinapatha was the one that went from either from Kashi or Kaushambi to the south to ending in Paitan. So why these places? Because they were like main junctions. And then from Paitan, the traders would go to one of the ports over here. Kalyan was a port for a very long time, Kalyan near Mumbai. I think there are several other ports over here. So this is where they crossed they went down the ghats, and the traders had to put a toll over here. So that's what you see here, and that's why it's called Nane Ghat. So here there is a Shatavahana inscription from 1st century. It's interesting that I think it's probably one of the first, if not the first, that has numbers written as numbers 1, 2, 3. And it also tells that Vaishnava deities were popular at that point of time. It was issued by a queen called Naganika, and apparently there were statues of 7 of the kings and queens over here, which are all lost now. They are not there, but the 2 inscriptions have survived. It probably was like a rest stop for the traders at that point of time when they crossed the ghat, and probably the king or queen, they wanted to tell their glories to them, in addition to getting the toll collection. I think I did mention about Uttarapatha and Dakshinapatha already, so I don't have to go up there. So how did trade go across these things? It would go on what they call Sartha. Sartha is a collection or a group of people. They would travel together for many reasons, for safety. even though there are roads, I think there were stretches where there were partly forests, and there is when traders are taking material, there are going to be thieves and all that, right? So they are going as a group so that to avoid all this untoward incidents happening. And if you haven't read, I highly recommend reading the novel called Sartha in Kannada, which is also available in most of the Indian languages by S.L. Bhairappa. That talks about a story that might have happened in the 8th century. Highly recommended that story. It's also available in English, Hindi, Marathi, you name it. Similar to the traders of Vaijayanti, here is another inscription, Kannada inscription, where it talks about how the traders from a place called Baligave, which is a very important place in the medieval times. It has many temples and so on. I just put this is not from an inscription, but ocean trade was also very well known. I think many of you may have read books by Sanjeev Sanyal, where he explains these things very well. But here, this is from a play called Ratnavali by Harsha, the King Harsha. And here he talks about the conversation is about getting the girl married to a person who is across the ocean. So if as some people think that the ocean travel was banned, it wasn't allowed and all that, I think people haven't really seen these types of references in either in inscriptions or in the literature, which actually easily contradict those kinds of incorrect opinions. Yeah, I think some of these things might have started later on, much later than this time. But this is from the 7th century, and it's talking about getting a girl married to a person from across the ocean. And when I'm here, I think I should also want to tell about why I sang the 2 verses in the beginning. So the first one, the Namastunga Shirashchundi, is a verse from Banabhatta's Harsha Charita. And that's the benediction to Shiva in that work. And that verse is used as the benediction in a lot of inscriptions in Kannada. Most of the inscriptions from the Hoysala times and even maybe some later Chalukyas, Hoysalas, and Vijayanagara, they have this Namastunga Shirashchundi Chandra Chamara Charave as the beginning of the inscription. And where was Harsha? Harsha was in Thaneshwar. Thaneshwar is near Kurukshetra, Haryana. And where is Halevi? It's like 1,500 miles away. But the work of Bana became the anchor for all the inscriptions in Karnataka. I mean, a majority of inscriptions in Karnataka. It's really interesting. And when we are talking about trade, taxes are definitely part of trade. I think all these kingdoms, they would have taxes, otherwise they cannot run their government, right? And so in one inscription, this is from 1204. It's talking about a lady called Vennale Settikave. So she is a small, from a village chief. So here there's an inscription which is talking about how just she was and how fair the taxes were. In India, generally the taxes was not supposed to be more than 1/6. That's what I think Manusmriti and many other Smriti texts say, that the income 1/6 belongs to the king. King meaning is the government, right? That's how it is. It's not for the personal use of the king, but it is for the person. It's just like how we get taxed today. So unfortunately, we here read on in the media how Alauddin Khilji built a system of taxes, introduced taxation. While this taxation has existed from long back, and if you know how just Alauddin Khilji's taxation was, it went up to 50%. Okay, so there you go. Okay, I think we have 15 more minutes, right? I think I have to be a little more quick. So the inscriptions talk about support to different faiths. This we can see. I can talk about mostly from Karnataka, because a lot of temples were built in Karnataka between, let's say, 900 to 1300 CE, during the times of later Chalukyas and Hoysalas. In Hoysala's 350 years, there were 700 temples built. So it's a phenomenal number to think like 2 temples were built every year. And many of them are, and some of them are small, some of them are large. And just a handful were actually built by the rulers themselves, but most of them were built by village chiefs, sometimes the ministers and officers and whatnot. We see that all different faiths at that point of time. In Karnataka, it was, I think, Jainism, Vaishnava, and Shaiva. All these were very, very well supported by these kingdoms. They say that Vishnuvardhana became a Sri Vaishnava following Sri Ramanujacharya's coming to Karnataka, but it doesn't look like, because his name Vishnuvardhana is, and Pittideva before that, they both mean the same thing. Pitti is Vishnu in Kannada. So it's not as if he changed his faith. And we also see that he continues to support Jaina shrines even after supposedly converting into Sri Vaishnavism. In fact, the lots of Jaina shrines were built after Vishnuvardhana too. So I don't think it's fair to say that he got converted. But even if he followed Ramanujacharya, that is not a big deal, because I think he and other kings of the times, they continue to support different all gods and all faiths very, very fairly. And coming to that is here the other verse I sang in the beginning, Yam Shaiva Samapasate Shiva. This tells about how various sects consider Shiva or Brahma or Buddha, Katta or Jina as the most important deity for themselves, but they're all the same. This verse is actually from a 6th century play called Prabodha Chandrodaya, 6th or 9th, I think. I forget that, but pretty old. There, the last pada goes as Soyambo Vidadhatu Manchitaphalam Trailokyanatho Hari. And this is found in an inscription in the Keshava or Channakeshava temple in Beluru, where the last line gets changed as Soyambo Vidadhatu Manchitaphalam Sri Keshaveshasada, because it is in Keshava temple. And this is from I think 1423 Bukkara. I think it's Bukkaraya Devaraya during Vijayanagara times. So how you can see how the equality of different faiths was considered by the people. That was part of their culture all the way from Prabodha Chandrodaya 6th century to 14th century. So you can see that Sarvamata Samanvaya going on in there. So this is an inscription this is an inscription from Malleshwara in Bengaluru. It has the Kadmalleshwara temple has an inscription where, interestingly, so here generally all these inscriptions have what they call as a shapashaya. So basically, it's the inscription is done, recording something, gift of some deed, things like that, right? And then they will say, okay, anybody who will not obey this, right? If they take the money of that belongs to the temple, or the whatever was granted to the person through the inscription, if somebody comes in the way, then they will get the sin of killing a cow in Kashi. So I mean, which is considered a very bad deed, right? So here, this also, and also they'll say this will stand until the moon and sun are there. In this also it says if somebody does something to this this dana, then if he's a Muslim, then they will get the sin of eating pork in Mecca. And so that kind of inclusion was also there. This is a fairly recent, this is from Ekoji. Ekoji is Shivaji's half brother. He was sort of in ruling areas around Bangalore in 1669. So during that time. Okay, so continuing to that. Okay, I think we have gone through a lot of this. I think I'll quickly go through this. You might have seen lots of temples named after people, particularly Shiva temples. I don't know if it is a rule in other places, but in Karnataka, I will say Chetteshwara, Rameshwara, Chenneshwara, named. Sometimes you feel why they look like strange, but here is an inscription that tells that the biggest punya one gets is by building an Ishvara temple, and the person who builds an Ishvara temple himself becomes the Ishvara, and the temple gets the name of the person who builds the temple. So that's why this is in a place called Korvangala in near to my hometown. There are 3 temples built by Buchi Raja, and that is called Bucheshwara, and then his brother Govinda is called Govindeshwara, and Nakeshwara. So this family of 4 sons and parents, they built several temples. They were officers in Faisal Narasimha's rule, and they also record that they bought the land from the village or whatever, and then built these temples. So it's very interesting to see how these people have made such lasting contributions to society by building not just temples. They have also built lakes, what we call kere, so for people to for their agricultural needs. So here is similarly charitable deeds of a person called Adi Gonda. He is being praised as his habit or his hobby was Kerayam Petisutirpulu, Aravattigayam Hudusittirpulu. Meaning his hobby was actually building lakes and setting up dharmashalas. And he didn't have Paratondilla Adi Gondange Uchugabindhan. He didn't have another job, anything else other than doing such charitable deeds. So so there were many women also who did this type of things, charitable deeds. Sometimes it's wrongly said women didn't play a part. They were always suppressed, etc. But I think if you see the inscriptions, I think you will see it is not really true. Particularly, yeah, there might have been some sections who did not get all the chances, but I think particularly there were lots of educated women. There were women who had power, and many village chiefs and things like that who did get into doing many of these tasks, such as establishing temples and schools and whatnot. So here is a eulogy about a person called Deva Bay. She built a lake called Deva Basamudram. Here is another called Mechale, who is being praised. This I put it here because recently, in like a couple of weeks ago, there was a find. They found a beautiful murti of Vasudeva in Hemavati river near Sakleshpura. So this is the temple that she built. Her name is Mechale, and the whole eulogy is about her. And then here is this is a famous inscription from Hampi, Lakshmidhara's inscription, where he was a minister in Vijayanagara, and he tells how the culture was built to from a young age. It says the mother, as she was feeding him milk, would tell these type of things, that build a lake, build a well, build a temple, and these kinds of things. So this is those are the types of things that were the values that were inculcated right from the childhood. That is what I wanted to show over there. Okay. I think we have talked about a lot about temples, so I will not go there. So just talk about one slide on types of education that was there. We can see from the inscriptions that there were indeed many places where education was given to people. In Karnataka, there were several. Kanchi was a very well-known Kritikasthana. Kritikasthana was one of the higher, what you call maybe a graduate institution, that kind of thing. There were many such. We have all heard about Vikramashila and Nalanda, etc. But apart from that, I think in all regions there were these type of places that did have teachers and students coming together. And here this inscription talks about where there were 200 students studying Shastras, Vedas, and 50 students studying Shastras. Shastra is actually, when you say Shastra, Shastra is any type of knowledge. Shilpa Shastra, music, all these are like Shastras. And here is in a Kannada inscription from Kalachuri Bijala, who is contemporary of Basavanna. This one is actually talks about a teaching Kannada, for giving a grant for teaching Kannada, teaching Kannada. So okay, I think I have about 5 minutes to breeze through this final section. This is about how inscriptions talk about music and other arts that are part of our lives. We know that Indian music goes a long time. For a long time ago, the earliest work on any type of performing art is the Natya Shastra. Probably it was written anywhere between 2000 to 2200, 2300 years ago. There were additions to that, but I think the original is over 2000 years ago. And the way Natya Shastra is, it already shows a very highly developed system of music and dance. It's not like very primitive. So by that time, it was already, maybe it had a 1000-year history. Otherwise, you could not have that kind of insights to performing arts that the Natya Shastra tells you. I mean, that is itself, it's a different topic. I can talk about just on Natya Shastra for an hour. Let me not go there. But here there is an inscription from Talagunda. Talagunda is in Karnataka. It talks about a place. It talks about how music was being heard from places and from houses, and how the whole place was resounding with music. Nana vida dravina sara samuchayeshu Dipendra madavasita gopureshu Sangeeta valgu ninadeshu griheshu. So music coming from all around. This is what the Talagunda inscription of 450 says. And we can see this references about music in from various areas too. I'm told that there are many inscriptions in Puri temple talking about music and the Devadasis who performed out there. This inscription is from Sangeetapura or Hardwalli in Karnataka, where it is it's talking about number one. It's talking about the Tulu country in the southwestern part of India. It says that the Kshinantya Bharatarya Khanda Nairutya Dik Samopabdi Tatopakantha Vilasat, etc., etc. And finally, Bhudhamam Taudava Deshamit Pudir. So it tells that in the southwestern part of the country of Bharata, and Aryakhanda, there is this country called Taulavadesha, the Tulu land. And it goes about how the place Sangeetapura is, and how every house is filled with Kavi, Gamaki, Wagmi. All these arts are supported over in this place. I just showed this to tell how the idea of a country and the culture has been part of us for such a long time. And then many of the kings and queens, they were actually performers. That's very interesting. We know that here a couple of inscriptions talking about Shantale and others, how they were very well versed with music. Shantala is called in Shasana, in inscriptions, as Geeta Vadya Nritya Sutradhare. She was the queen of King Vishnuvardhana. Veeraballala's wife was called Sangeeta Chudamani, and she was also called Jangama Saraswati. So she's compared to Saraswati over there. And in here, in another inscription, she's called a Patra Davalu. Patra means as a performer. It's not just one who knows or to appreciate, but one who actually does it on the stage. So Shantala is referred as a Patra Davalu, that shows that she was a dancer herself. So this one is from Tamil Nadu, called Kudumiyamalai inscription, very famous one near Pudukottai. This is, I think, the only inscription that has a lot of musical content. This is from around the 6th, 7th century. It has the terminology from Grama Sangeeta that existed at that point of time. Very contemporary to Brahadeshi of Matanga, and shows a continuity from Natya Shastra to that point. So by that time, Natya Shastra was already 1,000 years old. But the terminology used tells that, okay, it is coming from there. And this is Pudukottai is in very south of Tamil Nadu. It tells the how the music was, and we don't know where Natya Shastra was written. It's probably written somewhere in the North India, but we just can't say. Some people say Kashmir, but I haven't seen specific reason to believe that it is from Kashmir. Here is a similar inscription from Keladi. This is not very detailed, but it's called Tala Prasara inscription. This may not have been put as a real with the real intent. I don't know. I have seen this inscription, but basically this shows different types of laghus and dhritas that we use in music. I think there is more research needed over here to understand what it is saying or why it was written. But this is from the 16th century in Karnataka. And this is an inscription from 980, a Chalukya inscription, where it talks about the art of Gamaka. Probably this is one of the art of Gamaka is right now it's only practiced in Karnataka, as far as I know. It's basically reading of musical reading of epics of or poetry. The earliest reference to this, although not called Gamaka, is in Valmiki Ramayana, where Lava and Kushar go to Rama's court, and then they sing Ramayana in front of them, Tantrila with music. So it's very clear there that they are singing. They're not just reading it or reciting; they're singing it. So that we consider Lava Kushar to be the original Gamakis. And then that art was established in Karnataka around 1,000 years ago. I think this Shantivarma, the king, he himself was a Gamaki. So that's what it's telling. And this art must have existed in other parts of the country as well, but unfortunately, I don't think it's a living tradition in other states. But in Karnataka, thankfully, it is still there. Okay. My allocated time is over, but if you guys can stay for another 5 minutes, I can complete this.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. So there are references to science in these inscriptions too. It's Number one is as I said, the numbers. We know that the decimal system came from India. The numbers that we use all around the world, actually they came from India, 1 to 10, 1 to 0 rather. So the concept of shunya came from India. We all know that. It's incorrectly said that Aryabhatta introduced 0, but we don't think so. Aryabhatta doesn't tell that. Until very recently, the Gwalior inscription where 0 was represented here in this point, if you can see, as a small circle, was considered to be the earliest representation of 0 within India, and there was something that was supposed to be in Thailand, which was earlier to this. And then they dated the Bakshali manuscripts. It's not exactly an inscription, but the manuscripts have been dated, and they say they are much earlier than this. So here also you can see 0 there. And some people are questioning whether is there any contamination. I don't know, but the dating now says it's like 500 years earlier to the Gwalior inscription date of I think this is like 870 CE. In addition to that, there is a Julia grant of Rashtrakutas. For whatever reason, I have not seen people talking much about it. This predates. This is after the Bakshali manuscripts, if the Bakshali date is right, but before the Gwalior inscription. So here you can see the number 701. 701 Shaka corresponds to like 779. 779. I think that in the last century, what happened was a lot of inscriptions, copper plate inscriptions were called spurious, sometimes even without considering, because all the material that I read about this inscription say that this is not spurious. Even if it was written, when they spurious, when they mean spurious, it was not written at the time when it says it was written. So many times what has happened is, the copper plate inscriptions are copied. One is for fraudulent purposes and the other is genuine. So when it's for fraudulent purposes, maybe to get hold of land, etc. But how did they get hold of the royal emblem? So that's a different question. But yeah, fraudsters would be there all the time, so we know that. So we cannot deny that. But sometimes I think because the grants are getting corroded, whatnot, so they might be copied again. So therefore, they might show the script may show a later time, right? If you can identify than the time it indicates. Whatever I read about Dhulia grant, it says that even if it was not written at 701 Shaka, it should have been written in the very next 1 or 2 decades, because by looking at how the scripts are, the condition of the script. So I think the sequence would be earliest 0 that we have is the Bakshali manuscripts, followed by Dhulia grant, which is if not 770 CE, maybe 1 or 2 decades later, or even 5 decades later, which still makes it earlier than the Gwalior 0. Okay, and then there are lots of records of eclipses in inscriptions. The reason being, it was considered to do charitable activities during an eclipse. Hence, many inscriptions are actually given. They're dana given to a temple, or other what is called a punya deeds, getting you punya. So they are performed on an eclipse day. So you will see lots of dates, lots of inscriptions, many. I mean, I'll say 10% of the inscriptions you have might be on an eclipse day. So it's so high, and so they are very interesting. And recently, this one I recently found that there's a very rare supernova record in a Kannada inscription from Renuru from 1608. This is very rare, because until now we have thought that only Chinese recorded supernovae, nova events, and we didn't have any records in India. So, but here this is talking about a Muni, and then it also talks about how the moon appeared in the Milky Way. So this was a 1608 Kepler supernova, which was in the constellation called Ophiuchus. It's where the center of the Milky Way goes. And this star, when it died, it became so bright, it became like a full moon. So that's what it is. And it's very interesting that we have one such record over here. I think. Okay, I think that is. I think will not go in here because I had put a section how some of the biases that are seen in the media, particularly in the West, and they are also copied in India, particularly in the English media, how Indian concepts are being turned against ourselves, like calling swastika a Nazi symbol and whatnot, not considering swasti and swastika are like our apart from way back. It's not coming from just because Hitler or somebody used it in some wrong way. It's not going to change what swasti means or what swastika means. You have swastika of both the right, and then there are people who will split hairs about how Hitler's swastika is turned one side or turned across, whatnot, right? But if you see the rangoli patterns that we put on your this one, there are right turn swastikas, there are left turn swastikas, there are that are actually on the corner and all that. So that really tells that we are not to be read in a different lens when we are reading about ourselves. So swasti is to be good. Every inscription you read, you start from swasti. So and then swasti, Shri, Vijaya, Vidya, whatever, or whatever. And then here in this inscription, I don't see it here, but how it can the inscription can tell you some incorrect usages that we do, like in the 60 Samvatsara cycle. There in Karnataka particularly they'll say He Vilambi and Vilambi for 2 Samvatsaras. It was always a question, why are these these weirdly named? What is He Vilambi? Nobody knew, and then we found recently during the last He Vilambi, which was a few years ago, that the real name is actually Hemalambi. And in Kannada, particularly Kannada Telugu, Ma and Va are very similar to write, and then that Hema somehow has become Hemi and then Hevi, and somebody incorrectly copied, and then even Panchangas now give that as Hevilambi and Vilambi. This inscription is from the Hemalambi Samvatsara 900 years ago in Haleveedu temple. So I thought it was an interesting thing. Yeah, so I think that is. I think I'll skip all this. Okay, so I think I tried to sort of talk about lots of miscellaneous things about inscriptions that I felt were interesting to know, and there's a lot more. There's a lot more you can talk about each of these. But I think once you find the material, now that all these epigraphia, indica, etc., those texts are all available on the internet. It's very easy for us to go read them in the original languages too, or in their translations. If you don't know the original language, it sort of helps us to build a view that we just don't get reading some other textbooks or history books or articles. So we make our own research, and it's just for our own good of knowing how our culture has shaped itself. And I tried to share some of these aspects, and I will just open it for any questions if there is. or discussions that you want to bring up, points you want to bring up, and then we can stop. If you want to talk, you can turn on your camera, you turn on your mic, and we can discuss anything you want. I know that there are interested people here who can contribute too.
Hello.
Yep.
This is not directly related to it, but you did touch on the language, script, and how it has evolved and so on. So I just wanted to ask, I posted my question in the chat. You can take a look. So my question is, what is the academic motivation behind the current nascent movement to change Kannada script? Basically, a bunch of people who are advocating Lipi Badlavane. Are there any advantages to it? Are you familiar with the work of the linguistics work of Dr. D.N. Shankar Bhatt? Do you have any views?
Yeah, I'm quite aware of D.N. Shankar Bhatt's work. I've read all his books, and there are some of the aspects that I agree with his analysis about the grammar. And there are things that I don't agree. So in language or script, it is mostly because of what you get used to. If you go back 1,000 years ago, for example, in 10th century Kannada, there was a distinction of using there was indeed some of the words that were used in what we call tadbhava, that they were commonly used. And at some point of time, the tatsamams came in. They were also the tadbhavas got replaced. For example, it was common to write rishi for rishi in 10th century. But as centuries go, you cannot really predict how these things change. And the word rishi also came in, and it was started to be used as rishi only. So now you consider rishi as to be the right version to write, and rishi not the right version in the standard Kannada. But yeah, in specific places you will use rishi where you are writing a poetry in a specific style, right? So given that, you can see that lots of what you call typographical errors in the previous inscriptions also. So it's no telling, but generally my view is you go by what you find yourself around. So for example, some of the, as I was talking about the tadbhavas, right? There is a word called yatra in Sanskrita, which is going to a place, travel, etc. It has come to Kannada as a tadbhava as jatre, and then we also have yatre. So, but now in Kannada we use these two words distinctly, because yatre we say for something, mostly a religious travel to a temple, yatre. But jatre is a village fair, right? Those kinds of distinctions happen in languages. You cannot really stop that. Generally, the changes in languages happen much more slowly over time, and not by force and saying, okay, you don't use these words or you use these words, those kinds of things. Now I think they're happening a bit faster because of the reason being the media and TV, right? So they are sort of enforcing people, not enforcing, I would say, fasten these changes, right? They are making these changes to occur much faster than before. Normally, something that would have taken a decade or two to get established. Now you hear some usages, maybe they are incorrect on TV, and people, for good or bad, they latch on to that. So that's what it is. So I don't know whether I answered your question, but
so there was. So are you saying that there is some merit in what they're proposing, and there is some merit in making some changes to the script, and not all of them? Or what is it?
No. I'm not talking about the script change. I'm not in favor of a script change. What I said was about Shankar Bhatta's work on grammar. So grammar is the way he says, okay, no, you don't have to follow Sanskrita grammar to the T when you are describing Kannada grammar, which I agree. And then he says, okay, some of the words, some new words can be taught from Kannada, which is also true in the sense, right? If there is a concept that comes today, which does not have a word anywhere, right? It's coming from English somewhere or whatever. You can think of a word in Kannada. It's quite possible. So you can consider doing that. But when you do that, actually some judicious analysis has to be done rather than trying to propose a word and without knowing what it is. And that's all I'm saying. But I am not really in favor of saying, okay, you stop using certain letters of the alphabet. I'm definitely not for that. I'm for whatever is being used in the last 50 years. I think that's fine. And we know that some words, some letters were taken off from the alphabet because they were never used, right? For example, the old Ra and Ra. So these were used in Kannada 10 or 6 centuries ago. So they were written for another 4 or 5 centuries in written Kannada, but we don't know whether they were used in pronunciation. But after 18th and 19th century, they got dropped. So it really takes a long time for that to happen. If you see some words like kathe and kate, now they're considered equal, and both forms being correct, right? So, but when people see some as incorrect, right? If there is a sizable amount of people who think something as incorrect, so then I will say that is incorrect.
Okay. So yeah, final follow-up. Okay, that's regarding the grammar and how the language has evolved. What are your views on the script change? Are there advantages to it?
I think.
What's the motivation other than political, if any?
I think let's not talk, because I think there may be other people asking some other related questions over here. We can talk. Definitely, you can message me and we can talk about it. It's something that interests me as a Kannada speaker and a writer. So definitely we will.
Okay, sure. Thank you.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Anirudh. Anybody else? I see that there are some questions in the chat. I don't know whether. Okay.
Hello, I have a question here.
Yeah.
Could you please elaborate a little bit about what you've seen in old Kannada inscriptions and the progression of the language? As you mentioned in your talk, languages evolve, and in current usage, a lot of Kannada has borrowed words and phrases from other languages. So if you look at the old Kannada, how much Sanskrit content was there as compared to today? Thank you.
Okay, sure. I think Kannada has had a very much influenced by both Samskrita and Prakrita for a very long time. Even in old Kannada, there is a lot of Samskrita. Definitely, there is a lot of Samskrita. Today also there is much of Samskrita vocabulary. What we can see is some of the Kannada vocabulary or some of the Prakrita vocabulary that was there in old Kannada has been lost. So some of the like words came from Samskrita to Kannada in 2 ways. One is through what I call the Maharashtri Prakrita, which was spoken, I think, concurrently with Kannada in a large area of now North Karnataka all the way up to Nashik. So that is where the word. That's why you also see lots of Kannada words in what we know to be Kannada words in Marathi as well. So Maharashtri Prakrita. So their words came to Kannada through Maharashtri Prakrita. So that is one. And then later on, they also came from Samskrita. So because the use of Samskrita increased because it's just like English today, right? For most of us who are speakers of Kannada and speakers of other Indian languages, we may end up conversing with each other in English because we don't have, he may not know Kannada, I may not know Marathi and things like that, right? So we end up speaking in English. So Samskrita would have been something like that, number one. And Samskrita it was always useful to know Sanskrita, when you go to study things that you wanted to, because all the Shastra texts, just like today, medicine texts, engineering texts, we all went through English. So similarly, all the Shilpa Shastra, and if, let's say, for example, there's a playwright from Tamil Nadu, and he's writing a play, and he wants to see how he has to do that. If he wants to read Natya Shastra is in Sanskrita. A musician from Odisha, if they want to do something, and then if they want to see how their current music compares to what was there, Raga Lakshana, they want to read something, so the texts are in Sanskrit. So that is how Sanskrita went much larger as a studied language, even when it was not spoken. We don't think in Karnataka people spoke Sanskrita, but people who needed Sanskrita learned it because they had these texts of mathematics, texts of Shilpa, texts of Jyotisha, and all those things easily available in that. So after those texts were being written in the respective languages, then the importance of Sanskrita reduced to all these areas, right? That is when, by the time, a lot of infusion of words, vocabulary had happened. So we don't see a reason to change, even though there is word, very, very commonly used Kannada words are taken from Sanskrita, very, very commonly used. There may be alternative words that are not from Sanskrita source, but it doesn't really matter. So as a change, I think as a change from what was there in 10th century, style definitely has changed. The language definitely has changed going from then to now. But that is how all languages change. Even if you look at other languages, the difference between Old Kannada and New Kannada probably is something like what you see from Sanskrita to Hindi. All right. Just that we call it the same language, but in case of Hindi, in Hindi, it's become, there is something called Apabhramsha stage, and then becoming Hindi and Bengali and things like that. But we call it, okay, Old Kannada, New Kannada. In Tamil also they call it Old Tamil, New Tamil. But there is a lot of evolution even in these languages as well. I hope I got to some of the aspects that you wanted to know.
Sir, namaste. I was having one question related to the Mahaprana influence on Kannada. From so many sources, I have came to know that in Kannada, Mahaprana doesn't exist. And coming to the works of D. Shankar Bhatt also, he also excluded Mahaprana in his books. Or my knowledge extent. What's your view? Or is it really we want to exclude Mahaprana from Kannada?
I mean, I don't say we want to exclude Mahaprana from Kannada, because we see it's a question whether if people are speaking it or not. I see people are speaking it. There are dialectical variations within Kannada where Mahaprana is dropped. I don't deny that, but it is not all through Karnataka. So when it is not all through Karnataka, when it is not through all the dialects of Kannada, I say we should not be dropped. So that's as simple as that. We know that many of the words that, most of the words that use some Mahaprana are coming from Sanskrita or Prakrita, of course, and both are same source. And there are used in some other Anukarana sounds, such as like Jhana Jhana, Bhana Bhana, Dhana Dhana. So this is what the Keshi Raja and others give in their book, saying, okay, all the Mahaprana sounds come from Sanskrita, otherwise they come in these Anukarana areas. So does that sound exist? Yes, it does. Does it mean anything? It may not. It means something when you are writing in a context, right? So that sound exists. I am actually for introducing some symbols that were not there in Kannada earlier, but they have to actually use now. Like, for example, coffee, right? You cannot write coffee in Kannada as of now. It will become coffee if you write. So people introduce those two dots under that. So I would say we should make it standard that, when you are writing like coffee, you have to write those two dots. And we cannot easily write things like such as English sounds such as apple. You cannot write. So I'm in fact for changes in the script that can represent those things, because people are using those words as though they are Kannada. That's right.
Thank you, sir.
Namaste.
Go on, please. Namaste.
I'll join a little later. Sorry for that. Actually, my question is, what are the earliest epigraphical evidence found regarding temple dance or any mandapa dance or any court dance of royal court dance in southern India?
Okay, as far as I have seen, I don't claim to have read all the inscriptions or throughout. There are references to dance from 9th century, definitely. I don't know if I showed some inscriptions where they're talking about the music emanating from houses in 450. So it is it has existed from then, definitely. It doesn't talk about dance. And about 9th century works talk about the works from 9th century talk about music and dance. And Chalukya, definitely Chalukya, later Chalukya and Hoysala inscriptions do talk about the dance being performed, and some specific dancers. And there are descriptions in literature from Pampa, who is the earliest Kannada poet. He's from the 9th century, 10th century. So at that time, definitely it was there. So we don't know what was there before that. So whether it was performed in temples, I can't tell. But all Hoysala temples have this place called Rangamantapa, which is nothing but a dance stage. They are there in Chalukya temples also. I seen it in Madhukeshwara temple in Banavasi, which is which is older, but I don't know whether the Navaranga was a later addition. Many of the temples, what happens is, there's a temple, they will add the Rangamantapa, they will add something else, the Pradakshina and all that over time. So I don't know if Madhukeshwara temple was extended during the Chalukyas or Hoysalas. Yes.
I have two questions. Very interesting talk with loads of information. Thank you for that. One question is, do inscriptions have a specific format, and has it been followed all over India? Like, what I'm trying to ask is, just like we say Sankalpa, it has a particular format. You mentioned the place, you mentioned the time, so on and so forth. So is there a common format that has been used while writing an inscription?
I don't know whether it's a very very strict format, but mostly most of them start as Swasti, and during this year, that's how they start. Like, in the this year, this date, like the date, giving the date, and they will say who is doing something, doing the dana. Sometimes they will go with a very, very elaborate description of the particular king before the actual deed comes. Hoysala temples have very, very nice inscriptions about like 6-8 feet tall. Most of it is the description of the family, and then in the end there will be, okay, this temple was built, and the king or whoever, right, is donated this village. So meaning all the revenue coming from that particular village will go to the expenses of the temple. That is how it is. And sometimes they'll say, okay, the extra money will be utilized for repairs and this type of things. But this is general. I think some places where some things might be dropping, as they say, some very old inscriptions, they don't have all this data. They'll just say, okay, in the 5th year of King Ashoka, blah blah blah. So that's how they go. I think by 4th, 5th century, it became very standard to have this type of the format. Like for the earliest Kadamba inscriptions, for example, the Mayura Varma's inscription in Chandravali near Chitradurga, it just says, okay, there, it just goes like a line. He repaired a tank in the town. So that's what it is. It's very short. The older inscriptions are generally short, but once you come to 4th, 5th century, I think they're pretty long, and you have all this pillar inscription. You know about the Meherali inscription, right, in Delhi. They're all pretty long and elaborate. Then there's some of the Gupta's inscription, etc.
Yeah, thank you. The second question that I had is regarding the single Saraswati civilization and the undeciphered symbols. I was reading somewhere that something equivalent to a Rosetta Stone exists for that, but it hasn't been deciphered. Is that true, or can you elaborate a little bit more?
I mean, I don't know if it exists. I think what they say is if they find something like that, it will be very useful. But I don't know whether it's being found. Like when there's a Rosetta Stone, it is like on the same inscription, the same material is written in 2 different languages or 2 different scripts. That's how they sort of decipher some of these Ashoka's inscriptions too, right? There was, in Afghanistan, the same inscription text was written in 2 scripts, one called Kharoshti and one called Aramaic, so which is a West Asian script. So then I think Aramaic was already known, so they read that, and from that they were able to get to the text of reading, what is it, Kharoshti.
Thank you, sir. One last request. Is it possible for you to share the slides and also any references that you use?
Definitely. I will be able to use the share slides, and most of the references are that in Kannada that I had were either from the Epigraphia Karnatica volumes or a couple of books by Chidanandamurti. I very highly recommend, if you any Kannada speakers here, to read that one called Shasana Sahitya Sanchaya. I don't know who the writer is, but it's basically, and there is one called Shasana Padya Manjari. So the Shasana Padya Manjari has lots of poems, only verses from various inscriptions over 10 centuries of inscription. And the Shasana Sahitya Sanchaya has very, very interesting inscriptions from all the way from Kadambas to probably 15th, 16th, 17th century. Those 2 books I highly recommend. And there are interesting things from Chidanandamurti. He has, I think any book by Chidanandamurti will have something interesting about inscriptions at places. There is, I think there's one book by Chidanandamurti just talking about, I don't know whether it's Chidanandamurti or R. Satyanarayana, talking about music and dance in inscription. So that, as because I'm very much interested in music, I found it very topical and very useful. So those are books. And then Epigraphia Karnatica, if you go, you will find they are generally arranged on districts. So each district has a volume or 2. For example, in Hasana, there is one volume on Hasan district inscriptions and one full volume on inscriptions from Shravanabeлагula. So because that's the amount of inscriptions is so high there. So you can go there. Initially, if you don't understand Halagannada, it may be a bit tough, but as you start reading, you will get your way through.
Thank you.
So I had a question.
Sure.
Thank you very much for this such an engaging talk. I really loved it. So I have a question. Which is a very basic question. Whenever we look at any inscription, we consider it to be true. So are there reasons to believe that that an inscription can be not true? or false?
There are some reasons. Number one is, many inscriptions will go a bit hyperbole. They can. Generally when they're going on praise, right? They may say things like, okay, generally, they'll say, okay, the conqueror of the whole world. We know that they didn't conquer the whole world. So, but that I think is, you don't say they're lying, but it's a question of how they are used to in literature. It's just the cultural practice of calling them, Bhumipati or Bhuvanapati or things like that. When coming to their own valor and their own practices. So I would really say those things as like, intentionally lying, but it's more of a stylistic hyperbole. So that's one thing. And sometimes, people have, historians have said that, okay, King A claims that, okay, he overthrew the other, but King B says he overthrew the other. So there may be conflicts. So we don't know. Or maybe there was a fight, there were multiple instances where they sort of engage with each other, and then, both may be true, both may be false. We don't know. So that is one. And the other things where a lot of historians have claimed many of the inscriptions as fake or spurious, particularly coming to copper plate brands. This is in Karnataka. It happened to with with Ganga inscriptions. Gangas ruled for a very long time, from I think 300 CE to 700-800 years. They ruled South Karnataka and Tamil Nadu, parts of Tamil Nadu, and they have left a large number of copper plate inscriptions. So many of them, historians say they don't date to that particular day. The style of the script doesn't match with whatever day it is saying. But as I said, some of these may be recopied later on with their current script standards, right? If I'm writing today, I'm not writing like 500 years ago. But if I have to actually copy a document from then, and if I'm writing in my script today, it will look different. But if I want to keep that material intact, I have to write that particular date only. So they may have been written later, but not all of them may have been written for ill intentions. That is what I can say.
Okay, thank you very much.
Sure.
Sure. A follow-up question to that is, so how do you validate the truthfulness of an inscription?
I think I'm not a historian. I think people go with many of these things. One is how does the script look? How does the grammar look? And many times the forgeries have lots of errors. So that's one thing they will go by. If somebody is doing a hit job, they are more likely to make those kinds of mistakes. Many times they are. They may, if they use a word or concept that was not known at the time of writing that inscription. So I think that's what they will use that as. But I have listened to some talks where some people believe that some of the work done in like 18th, 19th centuries, claiming some of the inscriptions as spurious or false, have to be revisited, because we have learned so much in the last 200 years, right? So we have to revisit those things to see, does it really make sense to call them spurious, or is there a reason to say whether they are not spurious? For example, there are people who are saying, many of the inscriptions have been incorrectly dated. Considering, I think Vedveer Arya is one who has made the claim. Maybe I think there are earlier authors also, like Kota Venkatachalam, who say that there were two different Shaka eras, but now both of them are like incorrectly made as one. So which makes a difference of hundreds of years in many of the inscriptions, where they are referring to Shaka era A, but we are all taking from the Shaka era B, which are separated in about 600 years from each other. So that is I think people are working on some such things, but until anything concrete happens, I will just stick with whatever is the popular or more accepted view of the inscriptions.
Okay, sir. Thank you.
Sure. Anybody else?
Sir, could you share your, let's say, an email ID where I can ask a few questions?
Sure. My email ID is hamsanandi@gmail.com. I'll put it over here on the chat. And you can, I think many of you are connected with me on Twitter, and that's how you came here. If not, if someone has a friend or somebody sent here, you can connect me on Twitter. My handle is Hamsanandi.
Just one question from my side.
Sure.
There's an inscription near a village which is supposedly built by Adi Shankaracharya near Kollur, but there is no such date or period during which the inscription was done. So, is there any way to actually date the inscription, or during what exactly the year was? Are there any ways to do that?
I think for what people use is the style only, because if it doesn't tell a particular year, it's very hard. And sometimes some of the inscriptions what I've seen is it just tells in Bahudanya Samvatsara. That's it. It just gives the Samvatsara, and we know Samvatsaras go every 60 years, right? It's impossible to date that. Recently, actually, I'm telling by reading an inscription from the Harihara temple, and I just saw the picture somewhere, and me and some other friends on Twitter, we read it. It's a short inscription, and we know that by I didn't see it in the epigraphy volume, or maybe I didn't get that particular volume, so we just read it because it was like just 5-6 lines. It was interesting because it had some reference to number and all that. And then by the style, we decided it has to be somewhere either 1270 or 1340, because that around that time, that's I don't exactly remember the date, but 1243 and 1343, sorry, 1373 and 1273 and 60 years later, because the letter looks like that. It doesn't look like the 12th century Hoysala. And we know that the temple at Harihara was built at the end of Hoysala's reign. It has to be so sometime in the 1300s. And if you see that most of the calligraphy, nice calligraphy from Hoysala's was lost during Vijayanagara. So most of the Vijayanagara inscriptions are actually look very, somewhat primitive compared to the earlier Hoysala inscriptions. So this was still in the Hoysala, so I said, okay, it has to be either the 1270 or 1340, but not the later Vijayanagara. So by that, I think people can look at that. When they look at the script, they can sort of tell whether it is from this. I mean, it's not exactly possible, but they can tell whether it is from the 10th century, definitely, and 16th century. That difference is they can definitely tell. But whether they can date within 50 years, I think that's the best they can do. About 50, 60 years, that is what they can say. Yeah. Okay, thank you. If there are no more questions, I'm very happy to have spoken to you all. And now, if you are not connected with me on Twitter, you can please connect me over there. And thanks a lot for being here.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I'm sorry.
Thank you very much.
So I don't know what. It would have been nicer if I had. I was able to save it, but anyway, it doesn't matter.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Would it be possible to post the recording anywhere?
Yeah, I have a recording, but the thing is, it recorded this one. What you call it? just myself, it's not recorded the screen. So we'll have to do some matchup to show the to show the slides, as well as some editing has to go before I can do that.
Okay, fine. Thank you.
Yeah, I'll probably do that in the next 1 or 2 weeks.
No.
Yeah.